Welcome back to the official YouTube channel of the Indian Society of Toxicology. Today we will discuss a very important topic indeed. That is the legal and also the ethical aspects related to alcohol consumption. Quite fitting on a day like this. We all know today is Gandhi Jayanti, the 151st birth anniversary of Mahatma Gandhi, who devoted his life to the observance of non-violence, vegetarianism, and abstinence from alcohol. We will look at the legal aspects, implications, and penalties relating to alcohol consumption. So I bring you greetings as always from the Poison Control Center at AIIMS Cochin, and we have this 24-hour poison information service as well as analytical toxicology laboratory in existence from the last 17 years. We are listed in the WHO's directory of poison centers around the world, and we are also accredited by the National Accreditation Board for Laboratories. As I said, we will look at alcohol and the law. A lot of misconceptions here, and sometimes concepts which are discussed in textbooks, in reference sources, appear to be outdated. This is an area where we need to update our information from time to time because laws on alcohol keep changing, not only in India but the rest of the world. Of course, we will be looking at the legal aspects with particular reference to India, though I'm sure some of these apply globally also. A few of the issues that I'll be discussing may not be pertinent or relevant to other countries, so one needs to understand that. Let us begin first by looking at what do we mean by alcohol, because before proceeding to the legal aspects, we need to clear some confusion about what we are discussing. Legal aspects of alcohol. When we say, we should know as to what is alcohol. Alcohol is classified as an inebriant, and inebriants are a subcategory under cerebral group of neurotoxic poisons. The classification of poisons have been dealt with in detail in another episode, and I suggest those of you who would like to refresh their memory, please check out that video which we uploaded some time ago. I had given you a mnemonic also, the 6 major categories of poisons, standard classification, and of those, one of the major categories, neurotoxic poisons, under which you have subcategories like cerebral, spinal, peripherally acting. Under cerebral group, you have this division again: somniferous, inebriant, deliriant, and psychotropic groups. So alcohol is listed under inebriant subgroup. So we need to ask, what is the meaning of inebriant? Inebriant can also be referred to as an intoxicant. Both are synonyms. So when you are asked this question, your answer should be an inebriant or intoxicant is any substance or drug that is capable of intoxicating or inebriating. As I said, these are interchangeable words, synonyms. Intoxication and inebriation mean the same. So when you say an inebriant drug or substance, you are referring to something that is capable of intoxicating. when you look at the examples, the most important are the alcohols. And when you say alcohol, I have clarified here. The important ones from the toxicological point of view are ethanol, also called ethyl alcohol. Then you have methanol or methyl alcohol. And finally, isopropanol or isopropyl alcohol. There are some other alcohols also, but these are the most commonly encountered alcohols in toxicological practice. And of course, of these, the most important is ethanol because of the commonality. You also have other examples under inebriants like barbiturates, benzodiazepines, chloral hydrate, and so on and so forth. But those are different kinds of entities, and of course we cannot be discussing all of those in one session. So we will look at all these in different sessions over a period of time. And even with regard to alcohols, when you discuss ethanol, you will have to look at the medical aspects, the toxicological aspects, the forensic aspects in different sessions because it's such a vast area. So in this particular session, we will look at mainly the legal aspects. Let us begin by asking ourselves some basic questions. First of all, is there a difference between the terms intoxicated, drunk, alcoholic? Sometimes we find that students, medical students or the common man or even doctors confuse between these terms. We need to be very careful. When we say somebody is drunk, it is not necessary that he is an alcoholic. When somebody is an alcoholic, it is not necessary that at a particular time he is drunk. And when you say somebody is intoxicated, does not always mean that he is drunk or that he is an alcoholic. Confused? Yes, there is scope for confusion here. So let's clarify. And you can see on this particular slide all the differences between these three terms clearly laid out. When you say intoxicated, it means a person is beginning to feel the effects of an intoxicant. And I've given you the list of intoxicants, of which alcohols are among the most important. When you say somebody is drunk, it means a person is so intoxicated that he has lost control of his mental and sometimes physical faculties. We will come to the detailed definition of drunkenness a little later. And an alcoholic is a person who is addicted to alcohol. In other words, he has the tendency to consume large amounts of alcohol frequently over a period of time. I hope now it is clear as to what is the meaning of intoxication, drunkenness, and alcoholism. Having dealt with that, we need to look at what exactly is meant by alcohol consumption. What is the kind of alcohol that is consumed? So we are referring to alcoholic beverages, of which there are two broad categories: fermented spirits and distilled spirits. Fermented spirit is one that is obtained by fermentation of a sugar source, and you have examples like beer, wine, toddy. Whereas a distilled spirit is obtained by distillation of fermented spirit with evaporation and condensation. And you have liquor like brandy, whiskey, gin, rum, vodka, and even arrack, country liquor. All these are distilled spirits. So don't confuse between a fermented spirit and distilled spirit. In general, distilled spirits are stronger than fermented spirits. I've given you a list of common types of alcoholic beverage here on this slide, along with their respective alcohol percentage. Important to remember, especially if you are a medical student or a forensic practitioner or a clinical practitioner. Because when we come across cases of people who have taken alcohol and then they are under the influence, have perhaps committed some crime, or maybe they have got injured or got into a scuffle or whatever it is, you need to understand what has it drunk and what is the strength of the beverage that he has drunk. It depends. Like for instance, if it is beer, it can be light beer, which we refer to as lager or pilsner, 4 to 6 of alcohol only, whereas dark beer like ale or stout is slightly stronger, 6 to 8%. Then you have wines, a number of different varieties of wine, including natural wine like claret or cider, 10 to 15% alcohol, or it may be fortified or strengthened wine like sherry or port, 15 to 20%. Sparkling wine is a separate category, of which the best example is champagne, 10 to 15% of alcohol. And then you have the heavyweights, whiskey, gin, brandy, vodka, 40 to 45%. And among them, these most powerful is of course rum with up to 50% of alcohol. But don't forget, even the so-called liqueurs like creme de menthe or schnapps, the ones that are listed here, and so many others which are usually taken as a dessert wine. After finishing your dinner, have a few sips of these. That is a liqueur, and you should differentiate this from liquor, L-I-Q-U-O-R, which is a broad term that includes all of these which are listed. Whereas when you spell it as L-I-Q-U-E-U-R, it is something very specific, referring to dessert wine or wine that is taken usually after dinner in very small quantities, are quite sweetish. And they can contain alcohol percentage up to 50, whether you believe it or not. So you should not be taking lightly such beverages. Then you have cocktails, also often taken lightly. And you can imagine up to 45% alcohol can be present in some cocktails. Finally, the most powerful alcoholic beverage is said to be absinthe, which can contain up to a staggering 74% alcohol. Pretty dangerous, and one needs to be very careful when one takes such strong spirits. Alright, let us look at the medico-legal aspects now, beginning with the term drunkenness. But before we go to the definition of drunkenness, we should know something about the legal age for drinking in India. And there is often a lot of confusion, because as you can see here, in a country like India, the legal age varies widely depending on where you are located in the country. It varies between 18 to 25 years. 18 years is the minimum age in the states of Uttar Pradesh, Himachal, Puducherry, Goa, Karnataka, whereas it is the other extreme, 25 years in places like Delhi, Haryana, Punjab, Meghalaya. But in most of these states, it is 21 years. That's a general kind of rule. And you should remember the exceptions, 18 in the states listed here, and 25, again, you have the states listed here. Maharashtra is a kind of a peculiarity where you have 18 years as minimum age for consuming wine, 21 for beer, and 25 for stronger spirits. I am not very sure whether this is being really implemented so strictly. I think most probably it is taken as 21. But the actual position is what I have given you as per the legislation. So technically you can be in trouble if you are taking, for instance, strong spirits and you are under the age of 21 or maybe even 25. So you need to be careful. Now we have some states where alcohol is completely prohibited. Consumption itself is banned, let alone buying or stocking liquor or selling any kind of liquor or alcohol beverage. These are the states. Gujarat, right from 1960, after all, Gujarat is the birthplace, I think the place of origin of Mahatma Gandhi. So naturally we expect something like this. Mahatma Gandhi was always against alcohol consumption, and in fact he was hopeful of having alcohol prohibition throughout the country. So Gujarat has a very strict kind of law where you just can't consume alcohol legally right from 1960. You also have other states, like for instance Bihar, from 2016 onwards, pretty strict. Lakshadweep, again pretty strict and very well implemented. Then you have a slight peculiarities, like for instance Mizoram, where wine is permitted but not other forms of liquor. And then you have states like Manipur, where there are some parts where liquor or alcohol is permissible, but some other parts where there is prohibition from 2002. Nagaland has prohibition all parts from 1989. And then you come to the really peculiar kind of situation you have in Kerala, where the minimum age is neither 18 nor 21 nor 25 like other parts of the country. It is 23 from 2017. I'm not very sure as to the logic or the reason behind this figure 23, but then maybe Kerala wants to be different as compared to the other states. So this is it, the legal age. Depending on where you're located, you need to be careful because as you can see, there's a lot of variation. All right, coming to the term of drunkenness, very, very often misunderstood. And many a time when this question is asked in the examination, a medical student writes maybe something that is not entirely correct, erroneous. Is it this? Which is the definition of drunkenness. Not drunk is he who from the floor can rise alone and still drink more, but drunk is he who prostrate lies without the power to drink or rise. Nice poetry. But unfortunately, this is not what you should be writing in the examination. This is just poetry. I'm not very sure who coined this. This is not mine. It looks nice, when you read it, but the actual definition is not like that at all. It's a bit of a long winding definition like most legal definitions are, because drunkenness is a legal term. An individual is said to be drunk only when there is evidence that he was so much under the influence of alcohol as to have lost control of his faculties to such an extent as to render him unable to execute safely the occupation in which he was engaged at the material time. Appears to be difficult, but all that you need to understand is the essence of the definition is that the doctor must search for evidence indicating that the individual concerned was under the influence of alcohol. And when you say under the influence, there are certain things that you should be looking for. So when somebody is brought to the hospital by the police to find out as to whether he is drunk or not, this is the definition that should crop up in the mind of the doctor. He should be looking for signs of not just consumption of alcohol, but whether the person concerned has consumed so much that he is now under the influence of alcohol. So do remember this definition, do come back to it, try and memorize it. May not be all that easy, but if you have got the gist, the essence of the definition, that is all that matters. So let's look at how the scheme of medical examination goes in a case of drunkenness certification. This assumes importance today because breathalyzers are not very often used during this period of the pandemic because of fears of, infection resulting by the use of breathalyzers. We're talking about coronavirus or COVID-19. So breathalyzers are not popular nowadays, and a person who is asked by the police to blow into a breathalyzer, he can refuse on grounds of hazard to his health. So increasingly, I think police is resorting to getting a person who is suspected of having consumed a lot of alcohol and in charge of a vehicle on the road. They are taking such people to the nearest hospital and getting the person examined medically to find out whether he is under the influence of alcohol or not, in which case he can be prosecuted under the Motor Vehicles Act. We'll come to that later. So the doctor usually begins by writing this preamble. He has to have a requisition from the police. He has to mention the police station, the letter number. There is a particular explicit letter brought by the police, and he should write all the other initial details before proceeding to the preliminary particulars like date and time of examination, name, age, address of the person concerned, at least 2 identification marks, brief history. You need not really go into the details. You're not concerned about that. That is to do with police investigation. General appearance of the person is important as to how he is dressed, how he is behaving, so on and so forth. And then we move on to the clinical examination, where you begin by recording the pulse, the blood pressure, respiratory rate, temperature. You also have to do a complete, physical examination, looking at the eyes first, and then his hearing, which can be also affected like the vision. You also have to look for smell of alcohol in the breath, and pay particular attention to the way he's speaking. The speech is very important. Often it is slurred. And the way he's standing, that's called the stance, and the gait, whether he's having a tendency to stagger or reel about or even fall. You also have to test his memory and orientation to time, space and person. You can proceed to detailed examination of the reflexes, and then test for coordination. The usual kinds of tests, finger nose test, picking up objects, handwriting, manner of walking, all these come into the picture. With regard to picking up objects, don't place objects on the table or ground for him to pick up, which are difficult to pick up. You find out whether you can do it yourself easily, only then you use that object with regard to the patient. Don't place a coin on a surface, because sometimes a person who is not drunk or not under the influence also finds it difficult to pick up objects like that. So you have to be careful. You have to perform the tests in such a manner that they are fair to the person concerned and they are objective, they are easily interpreted. After having completed the clinical examination, you can take relevant samples like urine sample or blood sample for analysis, laboratory analysis, if that facility is available, but that's not mandatory. You can write out a certificate on the basis of your clinical examination as to whether he has consumed alcohol or not. That's dependent on the smell of the breath, and if he has consumed alcohol, as to whether he is under the influence or not, in which case much of the clinical examination would be not what you would expect in a normal person. A lot of things would be not what you would expect a person who has not had drinks to do. So his coordination may be affected, his stance may be affected, his gait may be affected. All these things you'll have to pay attention to. And finally, you can also consider that the person may have consumed alcohol and is now totally under the influence. So there are three kinds of opinions you can give, the doctor can give in a case of drunkenness certification. One, a person has not consumed alcohol because there is no smell of alcohol in the breath, and if you have done laboratory analysis and if that reveals no presence of alcohol, that is a clincher. And the second opinion is that he has consumed alcohol on the basis of smell of alcohol in the breath or in his vicinity, and if laboratory confirmation is possible, that's even better. And then if his clinical examination is more or less normal, then you can write person is not under the influence. But if the aspect of consumption of alcohol is confirmed, and then you find that much of the clinical examination is abnormal, you can tick the last, that is, the person has consumed alcohol and is under the influence, after which you have to sign, write your name, designation, address and date, and this becomes the drunkenness certificate. Do not approach a certificate like this lightly because of the legal ramifications and implications. All right, having done with that, we need to understand that a person who has consumed a lot of alcohol is likely to behave in a disorderly manner in public, or even offensively or indecently. So that is a punishable offense as per the law in India. A person who consumes a lot of alcohol behaves in a very awkward manner if he is at home or in private company, that may not be a problem, but in public that is definitely an offense. And there is definitely an increased tendency of a person to behave not just offensively but even indecently under the influence of alcohol. So you need to understand all this. Alcohol consumption is many a time associated with legal problems. There is also a tendency to commit criminal acts. Coming to drunk driving, very important. We all know that there are strict laws in place, not only in India, in many countries of the world. Somebody who has consumed alcohol or any intoxicating substance and then drives a vehicle, he can be punished. If he is driving rashly or negligently, and even if he is not, if the alcohol level in his blood or body fluids are above the permissible limit, depending on the place of offense, it can be considered for punishment. So I will be talking with regard to India only, of course, and the current concepts will be discussed because there have been some amendments to the Motor Vehicles Act. Essentially, when we say drunk driving, we are concerned because there is an increased tendency for traffic accidents, and that can be because of any of these reasons listed here, or maybe a combination of those reasons. Increased reaction time, that is the time taken for a person who is in charge of a vehicle to react to an abrupt kind of situation. Like, for instance, he's on a highway, he's traveling at great speed, and suddenly a person is crossing the highway in front of him. The time he takes to react to that and apply the brake is called the reaction time, and that can be increased by alcohol intoxication. Very important. In coordination, I've already touched upon this. There can be ataxia, so his steadiness of vehicle that he is driving, the steadiness may be affected, and even if he feels that he's having steady hands, another person who's with him may often be able to make out finer kinds of incoordination in the hands and the fingers, and that can greatly affect the way he's handling the vehicle. Increased aggressiveness is a problem that we all know under influence of alcohol. And then you also have vision problems like blurred vision, double vision that can occur when somebody is intoxicated. And don't confuse between these terms, they are not the same. As you can see from these images, the one on the left is what we mean by blurred image or blurred vision, and the one on the right is what we call double vision. So both do not essentially mean the same, but both can occur in the case of intoxication. And this particular slide has got a lot of information. This is to do with drunk driving, and all these points are very important. Beginning with the first point, anyone in possession of a vehicle on a public thoroughfare with blood alcohol concentration over 30 mg% is guilty of drunk driving as per section 185 of the Motor Vehicles Act. So the BAC, or the blood alcohol concentration, is important. You can do it on the spot with the help of a breathalyzer or breath analyzer. But since today we have a little bit of a problem, you can subject the body fluid like blood to laboratory analysis. And the clinical examination is also important to find out whether somebody is drunk and in possession of a vehicle. So as I said, the traffic police can detain a vehicle driver on the street or highway and subject him to a breath test with a breathalyzer, but temporarily I think that has been suspended in many places because of the rampaging pandemic. And if laboratory analysis shows the blood alcohol concentration to be over 30 mg%, he can be subjected to a fine or imprisonment. If he disputes it, the laboratory result, he can be subjected to medical examination by taking to the nearest hospital. And when you say drunk driving, it can be applied to anyone who is in the driver's seat of a vehicle on a public thoroughfare. He need not be actually driving. The vehicle may be parked. In fact, the ignition may be off, but the fact that he is in the driver's seat and he is on a public thoroughfare is enough for this particular law to be applied. All these are important points to remember. And the punishment with regard to the 2012 amendment of the Motor Vehicle Act, there is a differential kind of punishment in place today. Blood alcohol concentration 30 to 60 mg%, 6 months in prison or fine, and it can be sometimes both. 60 to 150 mg%, 2 years and or fine, and repeat offense can attract up to 3 years with or without, with fine, or it can be just a fine alone. The amount will be decided by the court. There are limits, of course. I'm not very sure whether this kind of differential punishment is being really implemented or not. or whether the old kind of system is in place, that is anybody who has blood alcohol concentration over 30 milligram percent automatically becomes guilty of drunk driving, and there is only one kind of punishment. That's the older version. The 2012 amendment actually gives this differential kind of punishment, which is important to remember. I think technically this can be applied to any person in any part of the country. Yes, these are images to show you. Once upon a time, the police had to rely on their nose to find out whether somebody is drunk or not and in charge of a vehicle on the road or the street. You can see this poor man trying to smell the breath of a two-wheeler driver here, and he has to do this with so many people. It can be pretty uncomfortable job, and that has changed with the arrival of breath analyzers, handheld devices which can be used as an on-the-spot kind of monitor to find out whether a person has got alcohol percentage in his blood over the permissible limit. And today we have not these kinds of breathalyzers with that tube and all that which you have to use to blow into the device. Those are all gone. We have digital breath analyzers that will give you very accurate results, and not much of personal hazard there, not much of contamination from person to person. And finally, when we look at alcohol and crime, we must know for sure that a person who has consumed alcohol is always prone for accidental falls, and also for incidents like drowning or burns, traffic injuries. I don't think I have to explain the reasons behind that. I've already given you what alcohol can do to a person as far as his mental faculties, his physical capability is concerned. So one has to be very careful when consuming alcohol, especially a lot of alcohol. One has to be very careful, because otherwise there is a tendency for a lot of accidental kinds of things to happen. And suicidal tendency also unfortunately can be provoked by intoxication. We all know that. Many a time a person who is depressed takes alcohol, his depression can be aggravated by the alcohol rather than ameliorated, and that's again important to remember. And finally, when you look at assaults and homicides, which are commonly associated with intoxication, sections 86 and 85 of the Indian Penal Code come into importance. These sections are to do with voluntary and involuntary intoxication, where if somebody takes alcohol voluntarily and then goes under its influence and commits a crime, he is automatically punished. No question of escaping by the excuse that he was not aware of what he was doing. That is not going to be agreed to at all, and he is going to be punished. Whereas there is a section of the Indian Penal Code that says if the person was forced to drink alcohol or administered alcohol without his knowledge or against his will, and if he comes under the influence and commits a crime, may not necessarily be punished. So that is important to remember. That is, if it is voluntary intoxication, always punishable. If it is involuntary intoxication, that is, a person has been administered alcohol without his knowledge or against his will, he may not be punished. And with regard to doctors, yes, it is clear that it is unethical for a doctor to attend to his patients after consuming alcohol, even if he is not drunk, and can amount to what we call professional misconduct. So a doctor, certainly if he wants, can drink alcohol privately in a place where there is no prohibition. So I've used the term, there is no bar against drinking privately, pun is intended, and he can even socialize at parties as long as he behaves well like all the others. And once somebody starts behaving indecently, whether it is a party in a private place or a public place or whatever, he becomes liable for punishment. These are things that every medical profession should know, and it is also important to note that medical negligence associated with intoxication becomes a very serious crime indeed. And even if the doctor was not negligent, though he was drunk, if the patient suffers harm or dies, he can be criminally charged. So I repeat, a doctor can consume alcohol if he is not attending to patients, if he is not on duty, And if it is a private, kind of a place, he can even socialize. There is no bar against all this. It is not unethical. But if he is on duty, even if he is not attending to patients, or if he is actually attending to patients, then certainly he should not be consuming any amount of alcohol at all. Besides being unethical, it can also attract serious kinds of charges, especially if something happens to the patient. Even if it is not his fault, there can be valid grounds for charging that doctor with medical negligence. So as far as possible, a doctor should not be touching alcohol at all. If there is any kind of possibility of him having to go to hospital to attend to cases, he should not. And if he's already started drinking and he's got a call to attend to some patient, he should not attend. Or if he's forced because somebody else may not be available, he should be honest and say that I've consumed some alcohol, so I would not like to attend to the patient as far as possible. But if there is nobody else, and if it is some kind of emergency, then if there is no problem with regard to the patient or his bystanders, then yes, he can attend to the patient after having made very clear that he is not completely sober. So that is only in especially life-threatening situations where there is no other doctor immediately available. But otherwise, the golden rule is he should not attend to patients at all when he has consumed alcohol of any quantity. So that is all from me as far as the medico-legal aspects of intoxication and drunkenness and alcoholism is concerned. There are a few other issues of special kind of importance. We will deal with that separately in a different session. So that's all from me and the Indian Society of Toxicology. Thank you for listening and for watching this video. Please do like it if you really feel that this is something that was useful, and continue to watch. Do subscribe to the channel and click on the bell icon to get notifications whenever useful videos like this are uploaded. Till then, goodbye and best wishes.